Alright, I'm going to be showing you guys how to use the IMM curve brush to make something that's segmented, but you still want detail in the segments. So here you can see I brought in a box model from Blender and subdivided it. I'm going to be making just one segment of tracheal cartilage and membrane. I'm going to squish it and also make sure that my symmetry is on in the z-axis, because the more symmetrical this is, the better it'll work as a curve brush. So after I turn my symmetry on so that I have my z-axis symmetry, I'm just going to sculpt everything out so that it looks like the tracheal segment. I'm trying to make a super clear differentiation between the membrane and the actual cartilage here. I didn't want to do it with masks, but I wind up doing it with masks just so I can get like a really clear division in between them. So that's what you see me doing. One of the other things to keep in mind when you're making something that you want to use as a sort of like segmented curve brush is making sure that your segments fit into each other. So I'm making sure as I sculpt that the bottom portion or the membrane portion that you see here will fit into the kind of socket that I hollowed out in the above one. It doesn't really matter if you don't do this, it just might clip either through or into whatever segment is adjacent to it, which you kind of want to avoid just in case. I'm dividing it to get a little bit more detail in, but make sure that you keep in mind that when you make this into a segmented brush that draws out multiple meshes, you're going to basically be duplicating the mesh as many times as you draw it out. So try to keep your polygons low. Otherwise, you might run into problems later when you've drawn out a ton of trachea slices and it turns into like a million bajillion polygons. I'm going to change the material just so it's a little easier to see. Alright, now for the actual brush creation part of it. I'm making sure that it looks straight up and down still. I didn't accidentally rotate it. And then you come over here, brush, curve, and then create insert mesh. And whatever you have selected, you'll make into a new brush. And now this makes it so that the mesh is appended to a brush. You can see that it just draws out one iteration of it the way that I have it currently. So what you have to do is go to stroke, curve, and then curve mode. So now you can draw out a curve and it will kind of align those meshes that you inserted along the curve that you draw. Here I'm making sure that I turn off my symmetry so I don't draw in weird directions. My segments are too far apart, so here I'm adjusting the curve step, and that changes the distance between the different meshes on the curve that you're drawing out. You can also see that it draws and extrapolates the curve out from whatever surface you started on. So if your curve kind of wraps around the geometry of your original object, then it will also wrap your line of meshes around the object as well. So be mindful of that. It's really helpful if you're drawing stuff out around a surface of something. But in this case, where we want just like a column of little tracheal cartilages, you got to be mindful of that. I found out that if you rotate your original mesh before you make the brush, it kind of changes the orientation of the mesh on the brush. which if you do what I did last time and start drawing out your meshes, gotta change it to curve mode again. But if you start drawing out your meshes and realize that they're going upside down relative to the original mesh that you drew out, either rotate and start drawing on the other surface, the opposite surface of your original object, like you'll see me do here in a second, or flip it in the brush. And between those two solutions, you should be able to find a way to make things the correct orientation. Each time you adjust or create a new curve brush, you're going to need to adjust the curve step to make sure that they're the correct distance apart from each other. This isn't something that's saved between different created brushes, so you have to do it for each time. Now I have a column of them that I'm kind of happy with. If I wanted to and I cared to mess around with it, you would change the brush size until it was the same size as your original object. But you can see here that you can kind of drag this curve around and your meshes will follow it, and it will interact with the other things. You're still in the same subtool, so as you're drawing stuff out and moving things around, it'll interact with the other things on the same subtool layer. Also, when you draw out your curve brush, it is kind of appended to the new object, but it is in a different mask layer. So you can see here that you can kind of flip back and forth between the mask layer that is the curve you drew out and your original object. So if you want them to be connected to each other and not masked, you can just clear your mask. You can also separate out another iteration of this curve by kind of dragging out that bottom handle that you see, and then you can edit that also by itself. Two other important things: you can edit the curve basically at any point along it, and you can change how much of an influence you're having on the size of the curve by hovering this cursor over until it turns teal and changing your brush size. So now you can see that's affecting a lot of my curve. Or you can dial it down pretty small and only affect like a little tiny chunk of it. You can also hover your brush over the top handle or the bottom handle, whichever you want, which you'll see here in a second, until you get this little red line. And then if you drag out that red line, you can draw more segments of the brush along a curve, so you can change the length of your curve as well.